a resolution requesting termination of the contract with I-77 Mobility Partners. And so here's what I'd like to do here. First, let me, since it was brought up by Commissioner Puckett, let me recognize him first. Then I want to recognize Vice Chair Clark, who serves as our representative on the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. And then I'd like to hear from a representative from the Department of Transportation, whoever else is here to speak for the department. And then we'll have our public comments, and then we'll have our discussion after that. So first, let me recognize Commissioner Puckett.
Thank you. This is born of a couple of things. One, frustration from 6 bodies asking for a delay to further consider this proposition, and that being summarily ignored. And as a result, Senator Tartt had spoken to the towns in North Mecklenburg and to myself, saying that were their resolutions passed, he would submit a bill to discuss the funding, and then to also, we would run parallel opportunities to see about other opportunities of taking care of what is rapidly becoming a untenable process with tolls. So I will just simply read the proclamation and then we can go from there. Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners resolution requesting termination of the contract with I-77 Mobility Partners to toll I-77 for 50 years and subsequent request for alternative funding. Whereas the final draft of the comprehensive agreement between North Carolina Department of Transportation and I-77 Mobility Partners, the developer, requires the NCDOT to compensate the developer if any future interstate improvement results in a decrease in toll revenues along the planned I-77 hot lane corridor. And whereas Governor McCrory has a bond referendum that could fund widening of Interstate I-77 with general purpose lanes, and even without the bond, there are funds available to widen I-77 without a 50-year toll lane contract. And whereas the motorsports community, members of the manufacturing sector, service and retail sectors, as well as other business owners have come out against the toll plan, outlining how the current toll-based plan will hurt their businesses. And whereas in recent polls, more than 90% of our constituents in North Mecklenburg County and the residents of Iredell County oppose the 50-year toll contract for I-77. And whereas I-77 can be widened for approximately $100 million using public funds that citizens have paid for through the gasoline tax, and the toll lane project will cost state taxpayers approximately $240 million. And whereas the toll lane project aims to gross $34 million a year from the drivers on the hot lanes, which is likely to adversely impact our local economy as a result of residents having less discretionary income. And whereas Interstate 77 is a primary evacuation route for 2 nuclear power stations in the event of an accident or terrorist attack, and the fastest, least intrusive manner to add capacity to I-77 is with general purpose lanes from near exit 23 to 36, which does not require tearing down of bridges or other unnecessary and complex work that is required to accommodate toll lanes. Now, therefore, be it resolved, on behalf of the citizens that we represent, the Mecklenburg Board of County Commissioners respectfully ask that the planned 50-year toll contract for Interstate I-77 between NCDOT and I-77 Mobility Partners be immediately terminated and the widening of I-77 with general purpose lanes begin as soon as reasonably possible. This is essentially the same resolution that was passed by the town of Cornelius. The town of Davidson passed a resolution also asking for alternative funding. The town of Huntersville passed a resolution indicating their support for Senator Tartt to place a bill in that would consider alternative funding. The business community is demanding that there be something done. Repeatedly, time after time after time, every time this has come up before elected bodies in that region, the answer has been very clear that this was a plan that may have been the best plan at the time, but is not the best plan at this time. And so I am simply asking that we support a resolution that supports the request that Senator Tartt made, that he would then be able to go to the state and start the process of asking for alternatives.
I second your move.
Okay.
Is there a motion on
All
the
right,
floor?
so at
Mr. Chairman,
this time,
Second. I second it.
all right, there's been a motion and a second, but at this time, let me recognize Vice Chair Clark.
well, I know that members of the board want to hear from the representatives of the North Carolina Department of Transportation that the manager arranged to be here, but I do feel like as the board's representative on the Regional Transportation Planning Organization, that I ought to at least give you some information to take into consideration as you consider this motion or any substitute motions that may be offered. I have been the board's representative on the planning organization, which is required by federal law, for at least 5 years now. And this process of planning this has been ongoing for probably 7 or 8 years. And all together, when you go back to its roots. The last 3 years, I guess, how long has your Governor McCrory been in office now? 2.5, 3 years? It really accelerated, in 2012. And I just want this board to be, I want people to know with absolute clarity that none of first of all, the towns of Davidson, the towns of Cornelius, and the towns of Huntersville all have a representative on the Regional Transportation Planning Organization. And throughout the entire process, 5 years, the last 3 years being the most intense part of it, where this project was planned and approved and the local input was given to the Department of Transportation, no one sitting on those boards expressed any concern or opposition about it or asked for any delay. All they did during that 5-year period, particularly during the last 3-year periods, was to hold up a green light go sign to the State Department of Transportation. The Metropolitan Planning, actually it's called the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. It now includes Iredell County as well, or the southern half of Iredell County, as well as all of Mecklenburg County. So they are actually participants in the process since they all joined Statesville, Iredell County, and others. It has been, it's a long process, and I think if you want to know why the elected representatives who serve on that board for the purpose of giving input to the State Department of Transportation on what they want. The reason we're doing this is because we're faced with a terrific challenge. Our gas tax and our highways tax revenues are diminishing. They're going down. And our needs are going up. And you might ask yourself, why are they decreasing? Why are they diminishing? It's very simple, that people are driving less, believe it or not. Vehicle miles traveled has decreased on a per capita basis and actually has decreased on a total miles basis. Also, at the same time, you have cars becoming increasingly fuel efficient. And you have a refusal by the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate to increase the federal gas tax. It hasn't changed since 1993. And what the 18 cents would buy you in 1993, I can assure you it will not buy today. So what's the purpose and why did they support this project with the express lanes and the tolling for the last 3 to 5 years and give the green light to the NC Department of Transportation? It's very simple. It's used in the business world, which a lot of my colleagues are always saying we ought to be more like a business, and we ought to behave more efficiently, and we ought to do the things that business do to get the most bang for the buck. It's called leverage. And what it means is that with the same amount of state money, gas tax and highway tax money, you can add many more miles of lanes to an existing highway, many more miles of lanes to an existing highway with the same amount of government dollars. And it is for about $100 million of state money in this instance. You are adding probably close to 100 lane miles altogether on Interstate 77. But, and it's, I'll tell you what really disturbs me, having been through this process and having watched how long it takes to plan and to execute on a major project like this, and having listened to the very notion that's popular with so many of my friends, conservative friends particularly, about government being run more like a business, is one of the things that I think you have to take into consideration is that to be a successful business, you have to honor your obligations. And if successful businesses in this world honor their obligations, and particularly their contractual obligations that they enter into in good faith, and that's how you develop, frankly, a reputation for being a reliable business partner. This resolution, in my view, threatens that, and it's a serious threat to it. And I think the fastest way to fail in business is to develop a reputation as an unreliable partner that does not honor your commitments. Others in the marketplace pick up on that very quickly, and they shy away from doing business with you. Finally, before I do it, I'm perfectly willing to talk to anyone. My alternate, by the way, as a representative, was the District 1 representative, my alternate on the Regional Transportation Planning Organization over the last 5 years. Never once did she say anything to me about slow down. This comprehensive agreement, your resolution refers to a final draft including a provision. That provision, and that's just inaccurate, that provision was in all drafts of the agreement. This agreement was signed a year ago. This has been public knowledge for over a year. And let me end by saying this will create jobs. This will create lots of jobs, and it will create them starting right away. Probably thousands of jobs. Not only the money that will go into this project, but also the bonus allocation money that we're getting under our Governor McCrory's formula, which gives us additional $100 million as a result of this, which will fund construction projects throughout this same region. So if you terminated this contract, sort of threw it all up in the air, take that into consideration. What happens to all those jobs and all those people who would otherwise be working? Because it may be a Spanish company that is forming the entity to do it, but they are hiring local people, and those are the people who will have the jobs. So let me stop, and Mr. Chair, I would ask you to recognize they've all been sitting here all night. We are actually quite honored to have with us, he was not recognized earlier, but the chairman of the State Board of Transportation, Mr. Ned Curran, who is with us tonight. As you all know, he is the chairman of the Bitzel companies. And I'd just like you to also know that he has no obligation to attend meetings of the Transportation Planning Organization, but he cares. He cares about this region to the extent that he comes every single meeting and sits through all of our meetings every month. The man is extremely dedicated, and let's see what they have to say.
Well, you have successfully stolen my thunder on this issue,
Sorry.
because it was my intent to
Apologize.
to recognize the chair of the North Carolina Board of Transportation, Ned Curran, who is a Mecklenburg County resident. We're proud to have him as a member of our community, someone who's given long service to the people of Mecklenburg County. So it's my honor to recognize you, Mr. Curran, and welcome. Thank you for coming to our meeting.
Thank you, Chairman Fuller, members of the board, Manager Diorio. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and I now realize I will have to be at the CRTPO meeting tomorrow night to keep that record intact. Appreciate the invitation very much to be here this evening. With me are several members of the DOT staff. I'd like to recognize Mark Foster, formerly a member of the DOT staff, and I know doing an outstanding job as a CFO. I want to congratulate you on your budget process and passage of that resolution this evening. Well done for all of you. At this time, what I'd like to do is introduce the Chief Deputy for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, Nick Tennyson. He is no stranger to Charlotte. He lives and works in Raleigh, but this will be at least his 6th meeting in Charlotte in the past month to talk about just these types of issues this evening. So with that, Nick, I'll turn this over to you, sir.
I did want to also recognize, I see in the audience, former City Council member Warren Cooksey, who is here with us. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Mr. Tennyson, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I'm Nick Tennyson. I just have to offer one correction to the Chairman's introduction. I actually am a resident of Durham, former mayor of that city, and it's important to me to make sure that I keep the home folks aware. We also have this evening with us a couple of representatives of the I-77 Mobility Partners, so in case there are questions that you need to direct to them. I have a couple of minutes of opening comments I want to make, and then we'll be glad to answer questions now or after your public comment period. All transportation projects take a long time from problem definition to construction. Before I go into any of the issues that have been raised recently, some of the problem definition phase bears revisiting. MUMPO, which is now the CRTPO, having carried out a widening project on I-77 south of Charlotte, recognized that widening alone had temporary benefit at best. Millions of dollars spent widening the lanes resulted in a return to the same congestion level, except with more people caught in the traffic. To their credit, the group determined to study the region, not just the I-77 South corridor, and after much study, reached the conclusion that future widenings in several corridors must include a user fee component. Since these facilities would be widening existing roads, tolling all lanes would not be possible, except in the case of the Monroe Bypass, where all new lanes are to be built. With awareness that using managed lanes as the toll method, in other words, putting a toll on one lane of the facility as opposed to all of them, since using those lanes was not risk-free, the first of these projects was identified as a candidate for a public-private partnership, P3. That project was included in the plan for the region's transportation, submitted for inclusion in the State Transportation Improvement Program, approved for the STIP by the Federal Highway Administration, and authorized for procurement. The procurement process included advertising for interested proposers. From those who responded, 4 were selected for the short list of those from whom proposals would be considered. Ultimately, no U.S.-based companies applied for the short list. P3 highway infrastructure projects are much more common around the globe. Perhaps as more projects are built, and there are about 8 underway now in North America, or in the United States, are built and a track record emerges, U.S. companies will match their existing interest in other types of P3. Following hundreds of meetings with the 4 proposers, the deadline for submitting a bid arrived, and only 1 did so. Preparing a bid is an extraordinarily expensive task. Those who do so are incurring opportunity costs for the projects they might otherwise be winning, and the bid from Cintra USA was the only one to consider. It was not accepted without review. After 2 weeks of thorough plan and specification evaluation, the proposal was determined to comply in all respects with the requirements imposed, and the process commenced to move to commercial close, which happened on June 26, 2014. Some have raised the issue of why we didn't rebid the project with only 1 bid in hand. Having set $170 million as the maximum state contribution to the project, Imagine if we had rejected the $88 million bid and then got one almost twice as high. Having moved to commercial close imposed some obligations on both the proposer and the state. We had to move as expeditiously as possible to financial close. Ultimately, the state contribution rose to $95 million due to provisions under which bids were to be prepared for sharing of risk related to interest rate changes and construction cost inflation. Financial close was expected by the end of 2014. However, moving through the TIFIA loan process is an unpredictable effort. We both were diligent in performing necessary tasks to acquire TIFIA financing, but had to extend the deadline twice for financial close. As you know, that milestone was achieved in May. Throughout this process, NCDOT has held numerous public meetings, visits with local elected officials, and participated in a working group from the MUMPO CRTPO technical team and responded to many public records requests. At no point did the MPO submit any alternative project for scoring in the corridor. The project that was actually submitted during this last round of scoring, widening with a general purpose lane from exits 28 to 36, was put in by the division engineer to ensure that if the P3 project could not proceed, we would at least have a scored project in the corridor. Scoring the submitted project for prioritization had to be based on the situation as it was expected to be in the project year. In other words, a widened road created by the adopted, approved project. As a separate process, a hypothetical scoring was conducted for the entire 26 miles as a GP lane widening, general purpose lane widening, which did not assume the managed lane project had been built. Differences between that hypothetical scoring and the ultimate project score, which is for a part of the prioritization system that we have used for our new project selection system, derive from that difference in assumptions. The department has moved forward as it is obligated to do to implement the State Transportation Improvement Program. The project was identified, procured, and is moving to construction in accordance with all state and federal rules. Terminating the contract at this point without fault on the part of the concessionaire would incur costs identified by the agreement, which we believe can be projected to be on the order of $100 million. Alternative funding scenarios put forward by various people rely on convincing legislative leaders that the best use of funds from various sources would be to end the contract and replace it with some other remedy at the expense of all the alternative purposes to which that funding could be put. The resolution before you later this evening contains assertions and assessments with which NCDOT disagrees. You can return to the podium later to answer questions on those disagreements, though our answers will not be new or different from answers provided in several venues over the past 2 years. North Carolina, the entire nation, confronts a reality that our infrastructure demands vastly exceed our existing public funding capacity. Refusing to take advantage of the opportunity to bring $500 million into the system via this project will mean we have to find it elsewhere, inevitably by failing to undertake a worthy project either in this region or elsewhere in the state. The projected growth in this region, the very limited topographical situation, the highly developed nature of the potential expanded right-of-way, and the alternative of a managed lane that can provide predictable travel times far into the future all add up to us as the best choice for using our limited funding. That was the department's opinion when the project was proposed by the MPO. It remains our opinion today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tennyson. I imagine there will be questions for you, but let's first hear from members of the public, and I just have two. Is it all of them? Just two? All right. So Chuck Suter, are you here? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you guys for taking a look at this resolution again. This is a big deal. I would slightly disagree with something Honorable Mr. Clark said, and that is, I hear from a lot of conservatives as well, we should run government like a business. I like the responsibility angle of that, but businesses are run for one thing and one thing only, profit. Government should not be run for profit, and neither should roads. And in Texas, you've got a conservative state that is now talking about getting rid of the toll roads. They're stopping the toll roads out in California. Excuse my voice, but, you know, there's a lot of issues that are caught up in politics. You know, we've got abortion, gay marriage, and a lot of this stuff is kind of like a 50-50 split. If it's a 60-40 split, that's considered a landslide. When it comes to these toll roads, it's 90% of the public are against it. This isn't a landslide. It's a mandate from the public for our officials to not fall for some of the misstatements, and we all kind of respectfully, hopefully, disagree with each other. But this very bright gentleman behind me, Lewis Mitchell, brought forward in Davidson the other night something that none of us really knew. We were told, and I think a lot of people thought, that NCDOT was going to break ground on this project this summer. That is not true. They are going to start working the contract to design this whole thing tomorrow night. And only 50% of that will be done by the end of the year. The rest of it won't be done till next spring. There won't be a shovel in the ground until next year. We have time to stop this. If Cintra, who has faced all kinds of corruption charges, if Cintra wants to try to pull that $100 million, is what one of the things they're trying to say. We want $100 million. We want $100 million from you if you want to get out of this. If that's the kind of partner we're working with, we definitely want out of this contract. And they can ask for $100 million and they'll get less. They will get less. Our representatives will fight to make sure that is less. But we're talking about a toll road that is $250 million. We can widen the trouble spot, and that's $250 from the public funds. Now, I know the public-private partnership, there's going to be additional funds in there, but $250 million for a toll road, or $100 million for widening the road where it needs to be widened. Let's do the math. If it costs us $100 million to get out of the contract and $100 million to fix the road with general purpose lanes, we still save $50 million.
All right, thank you, Mr. Suter. And next I have William Rakitansky. Yes, sir. Come on down.
Former town commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner Fuller, and rest of commissioners, and also staff, and County Manager DiOrio. I know some of you have known me in the past, and I tend to be a very, very technically oriented person. And anyhow, my name is William Rakitansky, and I've been a Cornelius resident and Mecklenburg County resident for 27 years. I am also a former Cornelius Town Commissioner, and also have served, excuse me, on numerous boards and commissions, both professionally and state and local and also county levels. I want to thank you, first of all, for allowing me to present a little bit different viewpoint in regards to this, and maybe some information you may not know. And I want to thank you also for passing the previous resolution about I-77. Now, I am not sure if you realize what other cities in the region, both equal to or smaller in size than Charlotte, presently have concerning the number of lanes from their suburbs to the center city. These other cities and interstates include Interstate 40 in Greensboro, Interstate 840 in Greensboro, Interstate 40 in Raleigh, westbound, Interstate 540 and 440 in Raleigh, Interstate 40 in Knoxville, Tennessee, Interstate 40 in Nashville, Tennessee, Interstate 77 in Columbia, South Carolina, Interstate 26 in Columbia, South Carolina, and finally, Interstate 26 in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, every single one of these other interstates in the cities noted have a minimum of 3 general purpose lanes each side, each direction, ranging from 10 to 38 miles long from the suburbs to the downtown area. And in many cases, these roads have 4 or 5 general purpose lanes in each direction. In addition, these roads also have no tolls. However, the most congested portion of I-77 in Lake Norman will be kept to a maximum of 2 general purpose lanes in each direction for 50 years, rather than having what other metro areas already presently possess in general purpose lanes. There are many more general purpose lanes in each of the other metro areas than is proposed for I-77. So I guess the question to ask our esteemed guests from DOT and Cintra is, why are we in North Mecklenburg, Iredell County, and possibly even this entire region being punished with just 2 general purpose lanes for us to sit in and fume, both literally burning gasoline and figuratively at peak travel times?
Thank you, Mr. Rektansky. Appreciate you coming.
Okay.
Yes,
well,
sir.
please pass the resolution. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm glad that we have the presence of some folks who can answer some questions that we all have had. And Mr. Tennyson, if you wouldn't mind coming back. I just had a few, and maybe some others did as well. We've heard a lot about the total cost of the project. Can you tell us, some have said that it only costs $100 million to do this, some said $250. What is the cost, total cost of putting in these lanes, whether they're tolled or whether they're not? What's the total cost?
The total project cost, including the cost to maintain, is approximately $650 million. That funding is derived from public investment initially of the $95 million that I laid out, plus under the state law, half of the toll-funded bond debt is to be made available, an amount equal to the half of the toll-funded bond debt is to be made available to the local area for projects in the counties that host the toll project. And that's where the $145 million that comes from, that makes up the total that's in the resolution of $240 million of state funds. It's important to note, important at least to me to note, that the basic project of 26 miles, a 26-mile long project, which will resurface all the lanes that are out there, as well as add capacity, as well as replace 3 bridges and widen 3. The 26-mile project is what happens for the total, and for the $240 million in state investment, oh, I'm sorry, the $95 million in state investment, there are additional projects that are paid for with the 145. So to then assert that for $100 million, you could do roughly, and at least the segment that's been previously identified is from exit 23 to 28, in other words, roughly 10 lane miles, 5 miles in each direction. You can do 10 lane miles for $100 million, or you can do 26 miles for $95 million. That's the math.
So the assertion that some make about spending $100 million just relates to that space between exits 23 and 28? Adding...
It is a portion, whatever it relates to precisely. 23 to 28 is one that's been identified as being the priority. The number also is similar to what would be of GP widening of 28 to 36. The bottom line is that it will widen a segment, and if it were carried out, would sequentially require widening to move that bottleneck along as it happened, and would keep the road under construction. Again, as pieces got added for 20 years once it started being constructed, and would have a limited time of relief, because the general purpose lane, once they're filled, what do you do then? With the managed lane, you've at least got some chance of having a predictable travel time over a long time horizon.
Okay. And then another thing that I had a question about, I know others did too, So this whole non-compete thing, as I understand it, you can correct me, but as I understand it, this contract prohibits the state from funding any additional lanes on that section that this contract covers. Simplified. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, I would never seek to correct the chairman of the Mecklenburg County Commissioners, but I would attempt to offer additional information.
All right.
From the time that the bid package or the comprehensive agreement was prepared, it was recognized that there was a value to the state in not being prohibited from widening 77 if it chose. However, in order for the bidder to prepare an estimate of what value they could expect to derive, some basic assumption had to be made about what they were building, what was their competition. And so in the contract, it was not a no-compete, it's the identification of a way for unanticipated revenue-affecting events. I love how we can get a lot of syllables into something. To be allowed as long as the developer is able to identify and claim any negative impact on toll revenue. Now, I'm expecting that there would be negative impact, but it's not a prohibition, and in fact, prohibitions do exist in some contracts. This contract was written with the awareness that we might choose to add lanes at some point. Again, that scenario and hypothetical requires some assumptions that I don't think are necessarily valid, but we are not prohibited. We are required to respect the original base case, the original business proposition that was put before the bidders. We have to respect that case, and if we change the deal, then we have to allow them to, based on documentation, claim payment for any negative impact.
All right. So it's not really a non-compete. It's more of a, if you do choose to do this in the future, to expand those lanes, add additional lanes using some other funding source, that the contractor would get some remuneration so that they wouldn't lose money, at least based on what they originally thought they would get, would not lose money for those additional lanes being added. Is that a
I think
fair way?
I think that fairly states the case.
Okay. And that particular arrangement lasts for the whole 50 years of the contract?
Yes, sir.
All right, and then the other thing that I've heard some people talk about is concerns about, the overall project, seeing things like this or projects like this fail in other jurisdictions. I saw some news reports of one somewhere in Virginia, them backing away. It might have been the same contractor. And then there was one in Indiana, I think I saw. So help us understand, or help people get comfortable with the notion that this is a stable relationship, given some other things that have happened in other jurisdictions.
The Virginia case was originally put forward as a P3. However, for reasons that I'm not privy to, the Virginia Department of Transportation commenced the project and attracted bidders prior to having environmental review completed. When the environmental review was completed, the permitting agencies said you cannot build a project of this length. So in other words, it would be as if we had started on our 26-mile project, attracted a bidder, and then found out we can only do 10 miles of it. At that point, Virginia changed the project from a P3 to a design-build project and retained Ferrovial, which is a related company, parent company, but not Cintra, to be their contractor, and continued with their environmental review. And again, I would never want to speak ill of any other Department of Transportation, but it's not a practice in which North Carolina DOT would ever engage. And so that project ultimately has been discontinued in the sense that Virginia has terminated the contract under which Ferrovial was acting as the contractor in the design build, and I am confident that there will be some lengthy dispute up there about who's damaged whom and to what degree. The Indiana toll road case was an opportunity seized by the governor of Indiana at the time, about 2007, to give a concession on a state-owned toll road, state-owned and operated toll road. And a package of investments was put together totaling about $6 billion. Of that $6 billion, $3.8 billion went to the people of Indiana in payment for the use of their toll road. And as a lot of things that were started in 2008, things did not go well for that investment. It did not perform. The lenders basically had the opportunity to, based on default, find a successor operator. They advertised for a successor operator to bid. The bids were about $5.5 billion, so in other words, about $500 million less than the original bid. The taxpayers of Indiana lost zero. The bondholders lost zero. The original organization that put the plan together took a loss, but did not even really lose all the money they had originally put into it. And that project is, as this one is, operated as a special purpose entity. In other words, standalone, does not affect other projects, does not affect, were another project set up by Cintra to fail, wouldn't have an economic effect on our project. It would have an effect only if our project doesn't succeed.
All right, so it sounds like you're saying there's some different circumstances in those other cases. And I did note your comment about the TIFIA funding process, a notoriously complicated process, which I think you said accounted for the delays between the commercial close and the eventual financial close in just last month. Is that an accurate way to put it?
At commercial close, we had anticipated being at financial close by the end of the year. So we thought we were going to be done by the end of 2014. The TIFIA process functions on everything's one of a kind. The negotiations involving that process and furnishing model runs and all the other requirements just took longer than any of us anticipated, and both parties in the transaction were diligently engaged in trying to get that financing placed, and it could not be placed any earlier than what we achieved.
And then the last question I'll ask, and others will have some, I'm sure. If the contract were to be terminated, which is what this resolution calls for, what do you see as the consequences of that? I think you mentioned the $100 million. Is that liquidated damages? What is that $100 million?
The contract that was signed in June of 2014 identified a specific liquidated damage amount for failure to move to financial close. Once the project had achieved financial close, the operative phrase is termination for convenience. In other words, it is not that the concessionaire has failed to perform. It is that the state made a determination that we want to terminate the contract. In that instance, we are liable, contractually liable, for refunding the debt that has been placed. Bonds have been issued, debt has been incurred. Plus, we need to pay the costs that were incurred by the developer. And there will be a determination as to what the fair market value is for this project. And that would be a part of the settlement. We have been careful not to identify a specific number Because ultimately, if we do termination, we will have a different opinion of what that number should be than the concessionaire. But it is a reasonable calculation, in our opinion, that it will be on the order of $100 million.
And even if that winds up being the total number, we'd have to pay that and whatever it would take to expand the lanes, find the funding somewhere.
We would, again, we would lose the opportunity to claim the bonus money that's a part of this project. So we would pay the 100 or so, lose the 144, 144,500,000, and then we would be left in a position of trying to evaluate what solution the region wanted to use to solve that problem.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for answering those questions. Let me go to Commissioner Dunlap, and then I'll get back to you.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. In the interest of full disclosure, I will tell you up front that I'm fundamentally opposed to tolls. However, I have been open and willing to listen. So I have some real simple questions. It is my understanding that Cintra would be allowed to use property currently owned by the taxpayers at no expense to build the toll roads. Is that true?
The improvements will take place on right-of-way owned by North Carolina.
Will there be any compensation to the taxpayers of North Carolina for using that property?
At the end of 50 years, there will be a new or like new facility in place on that property.
Okay.
We never lose ownership of the right-of-way, and we never give up the benefit of getting the project when it is at its conclusion.
In addition to allowing them to use the land that is currently owned by taxpayers, how many additional taxpayer dollars are expected to help this project move forward?
The $95 million in initial project payment, which is a little, I've phrased it a little poorly there because we don't put our 95 in first. Cintra's money's in first. So public will, for the basic project, not including the bonus, the public will have put in $95 million. And if during what's referred to as the ramp-up period, the project does not generate tolls consistent with the projections, we have an obligation to contribute $12 million a year up to a total of $75 million for the operation and maintenance costs of the project and debt service. We do not pay any portion of their equity, $250 million of equity. None of that is from that $75 million. But it would be a way to share the risk and hold down the upfront cost. There have been deals of this type where a guaranteed fund is paid, and so that the developer has the fund from which to draw for this ramp-up period. In our case, we chose to take the side of having the potential of having it due as well as projected, and then that would never be due.
Okay. So, and this is the problem I have. We're already talking about $160 million of taxpayer dollars, and it's an unknown cost of the land involved, which probably is 3 to 4 times more than $160 million. So the taxpayers are putting in my opinion, close to $500 million. And it cost how much to build a road?
The initial construction cost is on the order of $500 million. But let me just make sure, Commissioner Dunlap, that I wouldn't want to ever get into an argument with you about it.
No, argument.
But as opposed to a case where we are acquiring right-of-way and have to pay for it, and then ownership is transferring, in this case, we are allowing our right-of-way to be used in exchange for the creation of a valuable asset. It's not that we're giving it up for no compensation.
Okay.
And we never give it up. It's our property.
Okay, now, I've heard from other people about this project, some of my own constituents, and not necessarily about the I-77 project. Currently, how many proposed tolls are there to be throughout North Carolina, currently?
There is the currently operating Highway 540 in the Raleigh area, and that is going to be extended to join up with I-40. It currently runs from I-40 south. It will be turn east and join up with 40. There is the Mid-Currituck Bridge proposed to be a toll bridge. Then in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, in keeping with the MPO's study and their proposed projects, there will be I-77, for which managed lanes are projected both in the northern section and when we do any widening south of Charlotte on I-77, and the Monroe Bypass project, the 485 project, and Independence Boulevard.
So you can see the concern that I have. With as many toll roads, this basically opens the door to toll roads in Mecklenburg County. And fundamentally, I have a problem with the fact that you use my taxpayer dollars to build a lane, a road, that I then have to pay to ride them.
I have the sense from his approach that the chairman had something he'd like to say.
Yeah, because that just, I have a problem with that.
Commissioner Dunlop, in 2007, the Board of County Commissioners did me the honor of appointing me to chair the Committee of 21, which was the City of Charlotte had 7 appointments, the county had 7 appointments, and the Chamber of Commerce had 7 appointments. In 2008, I think I stood at this very same dais and provided our report. In the executive summary, we talked about the fact that we were concerned, this is in 2008, about catastrophic failure to Mecklenburg County's road transportation systems. This was simply a road committee. We weren't looking at any other modes of transportation. We looked at over 30 different funding sources. We had CBD congestion taxes, we had increased registration fees, we had all kinds of things. We had a half-cent and a 1-cent sales tax included in that. None of them came close to solving a $12 billion shortfall in Mecklenburg County over the 25-year period from 2008 on. The only source of revenue we could identify by surveying other areas was tolling that would put a dent in that order of magnitude. So we said at that time, we have to seriously look at tolling our interstates, not just the I-77 piece. Concurrent with that was then a fast lane study commissioned by the MPO. That fast lane study included polling local populations in the area that generally favored tolling when they were made aware of the consequences of not having that enhanced revenue source to do something about the transportation systems. At the same time, there was a statewide committee called the 21st Century Committee that was appointed by the then governor. And they came up with the same conclusion, that the challenges are too overwhelming for the state. We have to look at tolling as a potential solution. Governor Perdue, in her 2040 transportation plan, for my predecessors on the board, had the same recommendations. And now in the governor's 25-year vision, we look at tolling as some component of the solution. It's overwhelming, and without tolling, we will simply not be able to keep up.
Okay, given what you've just shared with us, if the community is asking that they be allowed to fully vet this project, and I'll be first to admit that we couldn't do it with 2 meetings, to determine whether or not all the claims are valid, why would the committee then accelerate the signing of the contracts?
Well, on the contrary, with all due respect, there was no acceleration. We signed the contract a year ago, then we worked through the financial close components of it. You heard that that was delayed. Interest rates were a serious concern. This is long-term debt. And so the first opportunity we had to close the financial component, we did. You know, issuing bonds of that order of magnitude includes bond counsels, evaluations by credit underwriters, going to the marketplace, having investors come visit Charlotte to tour the facility. When the bonds were finally taken to the market, they were oversubscribed 5-to-1. There was 5 times more demand than there were bonds available, and it received an investment grade. So this isn't something we can just rush. This is a massive contract, a massive undertaking, and you heard the consequences of terminating this contract. You know, I listened to you all with great passion talking tonight about $10,000 items, $120,000, $125,000 items. Canceling this contract is going to cost the state up to $100 million, and this region $145 million in bonus money. Canceling this contract, that's the cost.
Okay, well, I'm sure that somebody else is going to ask other questions that I have concerns about, but the good thing about it is we don't get to make the final decision anyway. We can decide to vote on the resolution.
Commissioner Puckett.
Well, so are you two guys very, very, very comfortable that you have laid out the entire feel for how this is? That all the facts that you've given are accurate?
I'm comfortable, yes, sir.
$144 million of bonus money. What does the bonus money do?
It's $144.5 million based on the debt amount, the total funded debt amount. And what it does is allow MPOs in areas where toll projects reside to have additional money to make transportation improvements.
So our MPO will have $144 million to spend as they wish.
It has to be spent on highway projects or
any highway project they wish, $144 million.
$144.5 million in Mecklenburg and Iredell counties.
Is $75 million of that allocated for 2 interchanges over the toll lanes?
It's my understanding that MPO proposals have been made reflecting the wishes of members of the MPO to make those investments.
So if this community says, you know what, we don't think spending $75 million, half of our bonus, to build 2 interchanges that feed traffic only onto the toll line, not on the general purpose lanes, you are going to build an interchange that will only send customers to the toll lane. If we said we don't want to spend $75 million building an interchange that just feeds to the toll, that $75 million could be spent elsewhere.
NCDOT does not control where that money is spent.
Would you think the contract would possibly have a problem if we didn't build those interchanges?
Commissioner Puckett, for many, many months, the MPO, CRTPO, evaluated a series of values, a series of methodology around how that money would be spent. That was brought before the MPO. They voted on the passage of it. Then they applied that methodology to the different options they had. And it's the MPO that has come up with those recommendations.
Well, and the reason that they've come up with those recommendations is because if you're on the toll lane headed north out of 77, you have to get off somewhere. And you currently can't get off at exit, the way it's designed, at exit 23 or 28 or 25. So to leave the toll lane, you do one of 2 things. You either shoot straight through Mecklenburg County, or you have to get off on a new interchange, or you can't get off the road. Is that accurate?
It might be accurate from drawings that were a part of the general description of the project. It is not accurate in terms of how the project will operate ultimately. Mr. Tamargo, do you want to handle this as far as what the next?
I want to hear, wait a second.
Well, okay, let me explain it.
Okay, please.
There was a minimum number of access and egress points described in the agreement. But the operator, ultimately based on design, is able to relocate those after consultation with a group of local stakeholders.
Right.
And that process is going on right now. If you'd allow me to let Mr. Tamargo come down and speak to it, perhaps he would be able to lay it out better.
No, because I don't need the detail, but here's an interesting piece of this. So what I'm hearing is that this is, when you say you've had meetings for 5 years fully vetting this, the fact of the matter is, as I sit here tonight, you're telling me that we still don't actually know where the exits are.
I understand why you would want to characterize it that way. I don't think that's what I said.
Well, you said,
What I said
you said
was-
it's currently designed, but we are still working on that.
What I said was that in the comprehensive agreement, there was specification of a minimum number of access and egress points. And from the beginning, and at least in my hearing on several occasions, I have heard an answer given by other NCDOT people that the actual final locations will be the subject of the final design of the project.
So it hasn't been designed.
I didn't say that. I said final design.
Okay, so it hasn't been a final design.
And you think that you've scored a point with that, and I would...
No, I'm not trying to score a point. What I'm saying, sir, is that when the business community is starting to pay attention to this, and when we talk about that we have fully vetted this and explained it, and yet you are telling me that it actually has not completely been, we kind of know what we're going to do, then do you understand why some people go, well, maybe what I heard before isn't exactly true? So I understand that point, and I'm not going to tie you down to it. Let me ask you another question then. So it is possible that of the $144 million, it is at least 50-50 possibility that one half of that would go towards two interchanges that will fuel the toll roads and not the general purpose lanes.
If the determination of the MPO was that transportation would be enhanced by making that decision, then that's their decision.
Okay. Okay. We also had, and let me back up and explain part of my frustration. I've got overwhelming opposition in North Mecklenburg and Iredell. And I continue to hear that everybody wanted this. Well, Jeff Tart was the mayor of Cornelius, and he said, when told that I have two options, I took the one. And we clearly have different options today. And so that's part of what we're saying is we understand that. I understand that what happened in 2008 going forward brings us to a different part. And there are costs to that. I'm a business guy, so I understand that. So there is a cost to making a change. But there are clearly alternatives there now. I understand they come at a cost. What is frustrating is the notion that this has always been very clear from the beginning, and it hasn't been as clear even tonight. We still aren't exactly sure what we're doing. We talk about the business part of this. Yes, the bonds were 500% oversubscribed for good reason. They're pretty much guaranteed to make money. They get to determine what their revenues are because they get to determine what the flow is. So they get to monitor their revenue. That's part of the deal. So that's a good deal for the bondholders because they're pretty much guaranteed to be solvent. As George asked, there's potentially $75 million from the taxpayer in what I would call the whitewater fee. It's the same thing that we have with whitewater. It was a brilliant idea. It was going to make a fortune. And the only safety net I need is $7 million a year from you guys, and we spent all $7 million. You know, so there is that. So
I refuse to be drawn into a discussion of presidential politics.
Excuse me?
I'm not going to be drawn into a discussion of presidential politics.
No, the Whitewater Center.
No, not Hillary Clinton.
That was my attempt at lightening the...
You're from Durham. I grew up there. I understand.
He's not Ken Starr. He just talks like
it's for them. I'm not going to spend a ton on this because we'll go where we're going to go. But I do want to bring out a few things when we talk about the clarity of this. And when this package was bid, and there were 4 companies initially, correct?
There were 4 proposers allowed to submit
Okay.
for the project.
Was the expansion of I-77 over the Lake Norman Causeway exempt from the clause that would require compensation if widened at that time?
Dating as early as meetings in mid-2012, it was clearly stated to planners and in response to questions sought by elected bodies that there could not be additional general purpose lanes built on I-77 without compensation.
And
A subsequent action to place a general purpose lane into an adopted future plan that technically would have made it an exempt project had to be dealt with a choice. And the choice was either allow the bidders to calculate the projected future effect of that project, 28 to 36, through models and other predictive means, and alter their bid to reflect that, which we were informed would be an effect of something on the order of $40 million in additional upfront public finance contribution, or include that project in the potential revenue events. And if it ever got built, and if negative impact was proved, to settle at that point. The department, facing the question of whether this project would ever be built, based on environmental issues in the area that it would be built, crossing those lakes, and based on the question of paying $40 million up front for something that might never be built and might never have that impact, the department made the business decision to include it as one of the unexpected revenue impacting events.
And when was that decision made?
The decision was made in November, December, posted on the web in January of 2014.
Okay, 2014, was that after the other 3 bidders had dropped out of the process? And you were negotiating a final close with?
No.
So in January of 2014, Cintra was not the only player?
That's correct.
Okay.
And just to follow that one more step in terms of at what point that was known, in July of 2014, there was coverage of this particular topic, and there were questions that came up from elected bodies, coverage on WSOC to the extent I need to give anybody credit. And so this is not a new topic.
Okay. You talked about $26 million, the 26 miles didn't score well on SDI. Did you score the 13 miles under the current SDI proposal from roughly 23 to 36?
No, sir.
Okay, so we really don't know if it would score high enough to get funding at this point.
There was no project. We scored under STI the only project that was in there, which was 28 to 36.
Which was basically the only project that people were offered. As Senator Tart would remind us and others who were there who said at the time this is the only thing we had. As a matter of fact, the truth of the matter was, and I appreciate this truth was, that smaller project would not have any interest from P3. That we actually had to make the project large enough to make it interesting for someone to invest in.
I think it's fair to say that a project has to reach a certain scale before it attracts investment.
So we could have scaled it, we just never asked. And part of that, I think, this is supposition on my part, was that we were told there is no money, there is no way to do it, so why even submit it? And I appreciate that.
And I think it's important to keep in mind that the 26-mile project was put forward by the MPO, approved in 2011, approved again in 2012, and that's the project on which we've been working.
And I completely understand that. I think it's a fair thing to say that at some point, bodies told you, we've got to widen I-77 and there's no money, go find me a way to do it. And under the environment you had and under the process we had, this was the only thing you could do. And I fully accept that. This was, you're told to do something impossible, and this was the solution. My problem I have now is that it is completely different. We have changed the nature of how we fund these projects. We have a new governor and a new legislature that has changed the way that we do this, hopefully to reflect a more logical method of doing it. And so, you know, at some point you go, there was a cost to doing it the wrong way. We have a new way. And that's what we've kind of said is, why don't we take a look at this? I won't take much more of your time. I'll say, we talk about the economic impact of this. What is the economic impact of this? What does the economic impact study on our region as a result of this reflect?
I'm not aware that there is an economic impact study.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right.
And there isn't, because you aren't required to do it. You're required to build a road.
Well,
But-
what we did was respond to an MPO priority and move forward with their priority with the awareness that failure to relieve congestion in this corridor would have damaging economic effect on the corridor with a no-build answer.
I'm with you. And increasingly, business people. I was with 150. I was with probably 60 this morning. I have been informed by the Lake Norman Chamber president that he will fully anticipate his executive committee tomorrow saying that he thinks this is wrong and we should endorse what Senator Tart is suggesting and at least look for alternative ways. I have people actively looking at this. Every one of them says, from an economic impact point, forget the transportation point, this is a disaster for their area. You are correct in that automobile miles are going down. In the last 30 years, tractor-trailer truck miles have increased 400%. That's before we open an intermodal system. Tractor-trailers are not allowed on the general purpose lanes. So you're stuck in general purpose lanes.
They're not allowed in the
In the
managed
toll
lane.
lanes. They are confined to the general purpose lanes.
Always want to be helpful.
I appreciate that. And we're not enemies here. We just have a different, you have a job and I have a job. And that's the way I look at this. But the fact of the matter is the transportation people are saying this is a disaster for them. For folks like me, that if for some reason y'all decide not to build 2 new interchanges, I don't know how I get off the road. You have now told me that, you know, there'll be some, at this point, I don't know where I get off to go home. But it may be a new interchange which eats up half of my bonus dollars, or it may be somewhere else. But for the trucks, they're still limited to that. There is still a concern with that. That is still going to grow. It doesn't work economically for the region. It probably does start to set up a stronghold. I have, as George mentions, I've got 3 lanes of pavement out there in some areas right now. With all due respect, if I have 2 lanes of traffic and I add 2 lanes of traffic, I have increased capacity 100%. This contract estimates a maximum of 20% increase in capacity. They're very proud of the fact that it has 20% increase in capacity, not 100%. To hear that you have said that the widening of I-77 in the south, which my office is in Pineville, so I know a little bit about that, that those 3 lanes would somehow be less congested if I had turned one of them into a toll lane, taken 80% of the cars off of that 3rd lane and put them in the other 2. It's hard to imagine. I understand there are people out there that will say that works, but it's hard to imagine.
I'm going to let Nick address the concept of managed lanes in a minute. Just a couple quick things, and I'll try to be very brief. I respect the business community's communications with you. I'm vice chair of the Charlotte Chamber of Commerce, and the Charlotte Chamber has enthusiastically endorsed this project. I deal with a lot of businesses. I deal with a lot of businesses that consider relocation. I ask the question, I ask about tolling. I've never had one yet say what they want is additional options, additional choices. They want additional choices that relate to reliability. I want to clarify something because there's been a couple of discussions about the design phase. There was an earlier speaker that talked about how this project isn't even going to get started. If I think about an office building in Ballantyne, it might cost us $30,000 to $50,000 to get a set of plans that we can have priced. If we decide to then go, it'll cost me about $1 million to get the plans to a point where I can actually build the building. That's the phase that we're in. We have preliminary designs, and now we're going to final designs. No one is going to design a tolling system that doesn't allow people to get on and off at exits. It doesn't make sense on any level.
I agree.
So then it would make sense that the system would allow for that.
I agree.
Part of the logic of the managed lane, the express lane concept, is that every time we add lanes, every time we add capacity, we fill them up. This is a system that allows choice. It affects behavior. When folks look at a tolling scheme,
this is a system that allows choice. It affects behavior. When folks look at a tolling scheme,
this is a system that allows choice. It affects behavior. When folks look at a tolling scheme, then they look at it and they say, well, I might wait a little while. And so that's why we think we get more utility out of this. That's what the fast lane study looked at. That's what the MPO looked at. You know, I appreciate the passion, Commissioner Puckett. I really do. I know this is something that you focused on for a while. I would remind you that a contract has been signed. The resolution that you are looking at costs $145 million to the local region and $100 million to the state to cancel. It's not about trying to go back and evaluate different options at this point. You want to talk more about it?
I appreciate there's a cost to getting out of it. I appreciate, though, that I think, and there are many people far smarter than I, that will tell you that the economic impact of this over 50 years will make $100 million look like spare change. I know the transportation industry is saying $100 million. We offer up $100 million to lure companies here all the time because of the 5-year impact of it. This is tying up 50 years of a project that works from a transportation point of view but does not work from an economic and land use point of view. You're right. To build toll lanes without exits makes no sense. But then you also have to count and say that I have to build exits, so half of the bonus money is probably going to go to those exits. So it's really not $144 million. It's really more like $75 million. We can't have it both ways. We can't say it's $144 million, but you do have to build some exits or it doesn't make any sense, and we're going to take half of that bonus money and build exits so the toll road works. Fine. At least just tell me it's $75 million worth of bonus money, not 144. That's the problem that we have with this. You know, I've got 7 toll lanes in the state of North Carolina. You've outlined 5 of them are in Charlotte. I have a problem with that. You know, I understand it costs $100 million. I understand. It might cost more than $100 million. We spent millions of dollars on a judicial software that didn't work. The state of North Carolina just spent $65 million on software that didn't work. We make mistakes and we have to pay for them. And we have fundamentally changed the game. There is bonding capacity apparently. I understand that's not just an easy thing to do. I understand I can't just put it on there. But I do know that if bonding capacity is there, then it ultimately is available. I do know that we have saved $400 million in general fund. There are lots of uses for that, but that is there. I do know that we have tax overlays. We got a half-cent sales tax that you conveniently mentioned me in the paper this morning saying that it worked. What you didn't mention, though, was that we have a half-cent sales tax that was promised to do 5 corridors. It will maybe do 2 and no more. So, yeah, I did say it worked in the South, but then I also said you aren't going to build 5 of them. But I appreciate you pointing that out, but you haven't been honest enough to say you'll never build the other 3 without raising taxes. It's the same type of thing I have a problem here. There's I don't want to say half-truths, but there are things that are not fully said. I appreciate NCDOT has a job, I appreciate you did the very best you could in the constraints that you had. I am simply saying it's a new day. There are new options. We do have to look at the economic impact of this, and that the business community and the elected officials in my part of the world are begging you not to make a 50-year bad decision. And in all due respect, I don't care that the City of Charlotte Chamber of Commerce thinks it's a good idea. The City of Charlotte Chamber of Commerce is not getting off at exit 23 and 28 and 35. It doesn't affect them that much, except that you aren't going to be able to get off of it to go down to the Levine Center. But that's a whole other thing. That fly is a little weird also. So I know you know my frustration, but sometimes you just have to say, you know what, we made a mistake under the best circumstances we could. There are different circumstances. I have an awful lot of respect for the people in Raleigh. I think they can come up with a solution. Thank you.
If I believe that it was a mistake, I would not have said what I said earlier. My job, among other things, which I have not succeeded, is to try to come up with ways to answer the question that you get to answer every budget time, which is to say citizens who want services and investment but don't much like taxes or fees or any other answer. And we have talked about a number of different ways to add to the revenue picture in North Carolina and nationwide. And to date, everything except the one you're talking about, whatever it is at the time, is a good idea. So in the context, again, whether life has changed since 2008 or not, the question is there enough money to do what we really need to do? And the answer is no.
I agree. The problem is that somehow it always ends up falling on Mecklenburg County. We always seem to be the ones that end up having to pay for that, and that's a problem. I might also add, and then I'm done.
All right.
There was a plan in 1995 to have general purpose lanes from I-40 to the South Carolina state line. That was a plan. And it had a funding structure with it. And it had the highest state gas taxes in the Southeast. And I and others dutifully paid that with the understanding that that plan would probably come our way. So to say that we can't change because the circumstances changed, we changed because in 1995 for 30 years I paid gas taxes. And the money got spent somewhere else. And so now there's a new plan. Well, I'm just suggesting that now there might need to be a third plan. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Gotham.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Puckett, for your remarks. I'm not going to ask you any technical questions. There's been enough of that. Certainly, I've read a lot about it. I've gone up to Cornelius and Huntersville, and I've been to the meetings, and I've studied this issue for quite a while. And I've certainly read up about it, and I appreciate what you're trying to do. I appreciate you are, Mr. Curran, I mean, I admire you as a community leader, and I know you're trying to do what's best. But I'm going to take this another side, and I'm going to talk about these people up there and the people that Mr. Puckett is talking about. And it occurred to me, and I also want to say, I kind of feel your pain. Because you want to celebrate you got this deal done, and you have all these people complaining about it, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I kind of feel that, because I kind of feel like that. I want to make an analogy a little different. I kind of feel like the toll road experience kind of reminds me of the Revale experience. When I was running for office in 2011, I sat up there, often by myself at the end of the meeting for hours, and I listened to commissioners talk about these people complaining about their revaluation. Karen Bentley led the charge, and there was some discussion, but it was just, the manager at that time just talked about, oh, there's communication problems, it's not that big a deal. And I just kind of thought that it wasn't that big a deal. I even said, I didn't think it was a big deal until I went and I talked and I listened for 32 hours at neighborhood meetings. I listened to people like these people up there, and I heard the stories. I heard them all over the county. And so then I started thinking, hey, I think we've got a serious problem here. And that's kind of where I think you all are. I think you have a serious problem. Now, Commissioner Clark talked earlier about business and we have to have integrity. Well, part of integrity with business is admitting when you make a mistake. Admitting when you made a mistake. I mean, car companies do it all the time. They have to recall cars. I mean, we've had all kinds of recalls, whether it's food, all kinds of companies recall things they made a mistake. We make mistakes as people. We make stupid mistakes. I made a stupid mistake last year with my benefits. I put in $1,000 for flexible spending and I never used it. I lost $1,000. I couldn't hardly afford that. That was my mistake. And I had to admit to the human resource guy, hey, I screwed up. I just have to eat that. That was my mistake. And when we had the revaluation, it was the county's mistake. The county made a serious mistake, and we kept hearing, oh, it's going to cost so much money, just like you're hearing it's going to cost so much money. Well, but we had to do what was right for these people, because we all worked for them. We had to do what was right. We screwed up, and we fixed it. We have a new manager. We hired people come in and do a survey and try to fix it. We suffered. The city suffered. The 6 towns suffered from the revaluation. It cost the county money. But we had to do it because it's what's right. And we had to do it so that we have a good foundation going forward. And I brought a little souvenir from the reval. This is what people up there said to us, and we had to look at this sign. I kept this from the revaluation. And I kind of think this is kind of where you are. I think you got to fix it. You got to fix it because we are North Carolina. We are better than this. And a lot of the things that have come up that I have heard in recent weeks about the about the toll roads, when the Department of Transportation person was up in Huntersville, or Cornelius, I can't remember, and Representative Jeter was there, and there was a big crowd of people. He didn't mention all this stuff that's been talked. So I think the people didn't get all of this facts. And I think it's government's job to give them the facts. And I think the facts we're kind of loosey-goosey, and we cannot suffer. And if it costs the state $100 million or whatever it does, it does. And you said we don't have the money. Sir, I believe we do. It's a matter of priority. There's always money. It's a matter of, do you have the priority? And I would just ask you to fix it, Just like we listened to the people. We listened to the people and we fixed it. And we're in a much better shape now going forward. And we have people trust our government more, whereas we used to get thousands of emails all the time. We don't get it anymore because people say, hey, they messed up, they're fixing it, they're trying to do better. And I would just say to you the same thing. I think I would ask you to have a real serious discussion. Did you mess up? If you did, it's okay. We all make mistakes. The county made mistakes. The city's made mistakes. The state has made mistakes. If you messed up, I think you should fix it for these people and for their children and grandchildren.
Thank you. Commissioner Lee.
Yes, I'll be short. Technicalities have been talked about. My question is the cost to even ride on those roads that worries me. The average citizen cannot afford to pay tolls going and coming, and that's a major issue in this community. The other issue happens to be a 50-year lock-in. Never heard of that before. And having been on this board for going on almost 8 years, I don't recall, and maybe you did, Mr. Clark, I'm not saying you didn't, brought information continuously to us about the progress of what was going on. I can't recall it. So if you did do that, can you tell me when? You brought a report back from your meetings.
Oh, no. I apologize if I made a bad assumption, but I assumed that people were knowledgeable about this. It was widely reported. And Karen Bentley, my colleague, our colleague who was on the board, was from the northern part of this county, and to the extent that, I mean, Jim says he's got his colleagues all, constituents all over him about it. She never said a word to me, not a word.
Well, you were our representative.
I am your representative, yes, indeed.
No,
That's
I want to make sure that I'm clear that we've never received reports to keep us informed, so that.
Well, I'm sorry, if that's what the point you're trying to make, you've made the point. If that is the point you're trying to make, you've made the point.
Don't be a lawyer with me.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying you're right, so you can move on to the next point you want to make.
I'm not trying to make
Okay.
you feel bad or look bad.
No.
I just want to
Just
make
go
sure
forward.
that I had not obtained information to help me make a decision or know the decision. I went to the meeting with Mr. Puckett, being the only county commissioners there that night, and he spoke earnestly about the issue. And the room was packed with men, maybe 2 or 3 women. And that bothered me, that women were not a part of this process, a number of women. And when the outcome came, there was still the discussion about the 50-year contract that we couldn't get out of, and the signing had taken place the night before because they knew there was going to be a meeting the next night. And I saw you there, sir, and I didn't get to speak with you. But I just have a real problem for the little man who's going to have to pay this toll going and coming. And you don't know yet how much that toll cost will be.
The average toll is projected to be something on the order of $2.50 because the average trip will not be for the total length of the corridor.
Well, where did I get $20 from? I think I heard.
From the maximum possible calculation based on traffic and revenue study.
So it could be, excuse me, I'm sorry. So it could be $20.
Commissioner Leek, you were there as well. You also heard him say at the meeting that there will be free lanes, that people don't have to pay a toll. There will continue to be free lanes the entire way.
How many free lanes?
All right, let's keep it. You ask him questions.
No, but he jumped in, so you stopped.
I did. I just want to make sure you.
All right, but I would like to finish this conversation at some point before midnight. So
excuse me.
If you can ask your questions so that you can get answers to them, and then we can have the next commissioner ask their questions so that we can get out of here eventually.
Could you ask Mr. Clark to not respond?
Fair enough.
I will not respond.
Thank you.
So the question,
that was my question.
And
yes,
you asked a question about having never heard of a 50-year term. That is the common contract term for P3 infrastructure investments. It's not unusual at all, and none of us.
But I'm saying for me it is.
And what I'm telling you is that as you begin to learn about these, and to the extent you're willing to ever consider a future one.
And $22 toll fee, that worries me to death. Is that one way or?
That is, depending on the time of day, a possible toll. The tolls are set dynamically, changing up until the time you enter the segment. At that point, you are charged the toll that's assessed at that time.
Thank you. And then you did mention jobs, that jobs would be available for Mecklenburg County people. Is that right?
Actually, to the extent anybody's mentioned jobs so far, I thought it was Commissioner Clark, but that there will be jobs from this project, certainly. And the concessionaire does not bring along everybody that's going to do the construction.
And we did sign the contract with a company that's not American, but from overseas.
We signed an agreement with a company that has a U.S. headquarters that is owned by another company. In a world of international commerce, it's hard to find anyone who doesn't have international connections.
And they've been in trouble.
There have been assertions made in various public hearings.
And I just wanted to make sure that I shared that, what I heard. Am I right, sir? But anyway, we won't prolong it. But again, thank you for coming.
Certainly.
Consider women as a part of this process. We do a lot of driving. We're on the highway.
I don't understand which meeting it was that you're
But
referring
if you
to.
don't understand, I won't carry
No,
it.
which meeting it was you're referring to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, first I want to thank all of you, both of those of you who are supporting and those who are not supporting this resolution, for being here and actually indulging yourselves for the last couple of hours. If we don't, I'm going to call for the question because I think we've beaten the drum enough. But let me share something with you. The folk up there with the nose on it, you mean more to me than I've ever seen anything. Because if you don't want it, you don't want it. And let me tell you something. I call for the question because I don't want it either.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a
Vice Chair Clark.
a substitute motion if I could.
Yes.
But first, I would like to say thank you to the representative of NCDOT for being here and answering the questions, and also like to, for the sake of all of you who haven't met him, Lewis Mitchell is the district engineer for NCDOT. And I do appreciate your coming down and answering the questions. I have a substitute motion, and I'm sure it will get defeated, but I would appreciate a second, then I'll at least be able to speak to it. My motion is that we table this proposed, I think you called it a proclamation at one point, Lawyer Puckett, but my motion is simply that we table your resolution pending receipt of two things. One, an analysis prepared by a nationally recognized independent consultant of the financial and the reputational consequences to the state and this region of terminating this contract. And two, that we receive an alternative plan of financing for additional lanes that will relieve the congestion on the entire 26-mile segment of I-77 North within the same time frame as the express lane proposal, and at approximately the same cost to the state of North Carolina, that has the backing of the metropolitan, of the planning organization, the NCDOT, and has a committed, non-contingent source of funding. I just think that it's irresponsible to adopt a resolution without having those two things in hand. So that is my substitute motion, and I'll see if I get at least a second.
I'll second it.
All right, it's been a motion and a second.
Speak to that.
Yeah.
And I will. I'll speak to it for 24 hours.
Well, may I speak to my motion first? Sure. I read it. What's the matter?
I thought you just spoke.
No, I just simply read my motion.
Okay.
All right.
I think that's
Well,
all.
let's make it quick, please.
Well,
Like you did me.
I just assume this had not been here tonight at all. But I think it's irresponsible for us. I think it's easy because, as Commissioner James pointed out, it has no consequence. It's just a politician's way of kind of, satisfying the drums, I think is what he called it. Commissioner James did. And so I just think that to ask for a contract that that has taken this long to get to this point with a feasible plan that will help relieve congestion on I-77 North when it's completed in the course of the next 3 to 4 years. To do this and to do it without any consideration of what the financial and the reputational consequences are, and without any alternative plan of financing other than throwing out misleading comments about a bond referendum that it could be in, when you may recall the state Senate has just said they don't think we need a bond referendum at all, much less putting any money in for this segment. Throwing out the notion that somehow the $400 million surplus in the state of North Carolina's operating budget for the current fiscal year that ends on June 30 is somehow going to be turned over to us to pay for highway construction is just ludicrous. So I simply think it's irresponsible and reckless for this board. I mean, it's easy to do because you're not really, as Commissioner James points out, there are no consequences to this resolution. It's just a way to kind of say I'm against it. But I don't think we should do it without that analysis, and I don't think we should do it unless you have a credible alternative plan of financing that will accomplish it at the same cost in approximately the same time. And that has the backing, I mean, your party has been in charge of the state legislature since 2010. You've had a governor of the state since 2012. And I just don't think we should do this unless you have a credible alternative plan that has a committed, dedicated, non-contingent source of financing as an alternative. Mr. Puckett.
Okay, you know, every year, this board votes half of the county's revenues and hands it over to CMS with no plan. None. Half of our revenues go to CMS with no plan. No commitment of how they'll spend the money, no commitment of what they will do with the money, no commitment of what they will achieve with the money. Half of our money every single year goes there, and we trust them. So to tell me that I have to come up with a plan to solve the congestion problem on I-77 when I have one that I think doesn't work isn't it. I agree with Bill. This isn't our bailiwick, but the fact of the matter is I've sat and listened to these people go, nobody disagrees with this. I am so mad that you were throwing Karen Bentley under the bus by saying that she didn't oppose it. No, she didn't oppose it because we were told it was the only option. And in all honesty, at the time, it was the only option. I have been kind to these folks and said they were given an impossible task. Widen a road when there's no money. Let's get political. There's no money because the Democrats took the money out of the Highway Transportation Fund and spent it in the general fund. I've tried not to be political. The cash that went in there is gone for other projects. That's where the money went. That's why there's no road money. So to hear that everybody thinks this is a good idea is why Huntersville and Davidson, Cornelius, Mooresville, Iredell, and this board is saying, I don't know what everybody likes this idea is, but we're saying we think it's not a good idea. I don't have to have a solution to say I recognize a bad idea. And that's all I'm saying. Senator Tart said, if we can demonstrate that there is a commitment from the people he represents, he will take this forward and he, working with other people in Raleigh, will seek alternative funding methods. I am doing what he asked me to do. I am representing the people that I represent. I'm representing the people in Mecklenburg County who, out of 7 toll projects, we have 5 of them. So maybe this is the time to say, this is a bad idea in North Mecklenburg. It might also be a bad idea on I-77 and 485 and all the other ones too. Maybe we need to come up with an alternative rather than this one because times have changed. So we can delay this further if you like by spending some money and getting some kind of a study that will deal with, we will do their job for them. Or we can simply say, there's a whole bunch of people in our county who don't like this. The public has heard that everybody likes it. I want to at least say I don't like it. The people I represent don't like it. They elected me to speak for them because they can't come down here and speak. So that's what I'm doing. And then I'm going to send it to Senator Tart, and I'm going to tell the governor I hope that he's a smart enough man to figure out an alternative. His predecessor couldn't. Maybe he can. And that's all I'm asking for. Thank you.
Call for the question. Call for the question.
I had my hand up first.
Oh, he is.
Mr. Dunlap.
Maybe we should call for the question on consent items.
You've already done that. You've already done that.
Okay, so, as the seconder of the motion, Commissioner Clark, my concern is that what you're asking for should have already been done. And I'm making a point to give people the opportunity to be heard. And so I wanted to hear what your concern is. And if in fact that you believe that these things could be done, then what's wrong with both and? What's wrong with us approving a resolution that ultimately has no impact, as has been stated before? It's just the fact that we were brought into it and we have the opportunity to express our concern. But what's wrong with the notion of still providing this information to the public?
I don't understand the question.
Well, you made a recommendation that we bring forth all this information. And the bigger concern is at whose expense? That's the even bigger concern, because it ain't cheap.
And it ain't our job, but.
Okay, well, let me remove the first condition, which, and all I'll say is that I think we should have an alternative plan of financing. And I think it's on, frankly, I think it's on, the burden should be on those who are saying, do something else.
Okay. All right, so let's vote on this motion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No?
No.
Motion fails. The next, then, we go to the motion made by Commissioner Puckett with respect to the resolution. And I'm ready to vote on that. I do want to explain why I'm voting the way I am. I don't just play a lawyer on TV, I'm actually a lawyer. And I often have clients who want to do things out of an emotional response. And it is my job to tell my client, I understand that's what you want to do, but think it all the way through. So if you terminate this contract, then what? You pay the $100 million, then what? I haven't heard the what. And if our resolutions don't mean anything, then we shouldn't pass them. So, and I believe our resolution should mean something. That means that when we pass a resolution, it should have some impact. I don't believe in just passing resolutions just to be doing it. So, I am still troubled by this deal. I've said that from the beginning. Maybe there are a lot of reasons why it didn't wind up being a better deal. And I'm sure there were. But from what I've heard, it troubles me greatly. What troubles me more is the notion of simply spending $100 million of this state's money to get out of this contract and have no plan for what to do then. I think that's even worse. If the resolution said something along the lines of, we encourage a renegotiation, we encourage an amendment of the contract, I could go with that. But to actually advocate a position to terminate the contract, I don't believe is responsible. I would not advise my client to do that. I would say, let's work on an amendment. Let's work on renegotiation, something. But as the resolution reads, I can't support us saying, taking an affirmative position without really having an analysis done even by our staff as to whether or not this is a reasonable thing to do under the circumstances. I'm just very uncomfortable doing that. At the same time that I believe things do need to be fixed. Clearly there's something that the public is responding to that is legitimate, and that has to be fixed. The question is terminating the contract going to fix it? That's the question. And I don't see, I haven't heard anything that leads me to believe that terminating the contract would fix the problem that everyone is complaining about.
Mr. Chairman, can I alter my...
If I can finish.
Oh, well, go ahead.
And if instead we said the public's concerns are legitimate, there are questions that need to be answered, there are things that need to be changed, then let's say that. But to go all the way to the point of saying termination, I just can't support that. Commissioner Puckett.
I would like to alter my resolution to say immediately terminate, blah, blah, at the very end, the contract for NCDOT and I-77 Mobility Partners be immediately terminated, and ask the North Carolina Legislature and Governor McCrory to start immediate investigation into reasonable alternative funding sources.
You're amending your resolution?
To include, as he suggested, and I think a well point, that it should have something else to it. So we will terminate the contract and direct those who are charged with this to seek reasonable alternative solutions.
I second that motion.
Call for the question.
Well, so you're still asking for termination? I'm saying before you ask for that, I would rather say renegotiation or modification of the contract, something along those lines.
With all due respect, I suggest you vote against this one.
Well, I'll have to if you don't agree to change. All right. So the motion now is to pass the resolution as amended by Commissioner Puckett and seconded by Commissioner Dunlap. Is everyone now ready?
Yes.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. No. All right, so that carries. Thank you for that discussion.
Thank you, and thank you, NCDOT.